Welcome to Levellers Day 2020, and it's a great shame that we can't all be together in Burford celebrating the lives of those three levellers shot to death in Burford churchyard during the Great Revolt at the end of the Second Civil War in 1649. But perhaps there's no more important year to be remembering the levellers. It was, after all, Colonel Thomas Rainsborough, the highest-ranking New Model Army officer to support the Leveller movement, who said that the poorest he that is in England hath a life to live as the greatest he. And he went on to say that he feared that at the end of the Civil War it would be the rich and powerful who made the greater part of the nation into hewers of wood and drawers of water. In other words, that they would not be able to shape the society in a way that they found equitable, that they found democratic, that they wouldn't be able to exert their voices and be heard, even though they were the people who'd been doing the fighting. Thomas Rainsborough was joined by Edward Sexby in the great Putney debates, who said that if the grandees, as they called them, had said that at the end of this there would be no place for the voices of the ordinary soldiers, they would have had a great deal fewer to fight for them. And I guess that's an important message for us to carry on. It's strikingly similar to the way in which key workers are being treated now, denigrated before this crisis, lauded during it, but now the real bones of austerity are beginning to appear. They're driving back to work in dangerous conditions, the inability of those who we have so recently praised to be able to determine how and when they'll be forced back to their workplaces. So the idea, absolutely central to the labour movement, that those who do the work, those that do the fighting, those that the heroes of the hour, should have their voice heard, that they should be able to shape the society around them, that the grandees and the rich and the powerful, those who in the 17th century fled London in fear of the plague to their country houses, shouldn't be the people that decide how the society goes forward. So here, Levellers Day, time to remember the people that actually do the work in the society, actually do the fighting, actually have been the heroes on this battlefield, and say that our society should not ignore them, that their voices must be heard, that they must shape their own future, just as the Levellers insisted that those who had done the fighting, who'd won the war, and who'd struggled to have their voices heard, should shape the society after the Civil War.
The resurrection of Levellers Day in Burford. In 1975, members of the Workers' Education Association, WEA, Oxford Industrial Branch, went to Burford to reclaim a missing piece of history. They held a meeting in remembrance of the Leveller soldiers executed outside of Burford Church in 1649. The following year, Tony Benn came and read in the church, and every year since then, people have come to Burford on the Saturday nearest to the 17th of May to debate and discuss current and historical issues, march through the streets of Burford with banners and drums, listen to music, and remember the Levellers and the importance of holding on to the ideals of justice and democracy. This was part of a movement in Socialist and Labour history to recover and resurrect the radical and revolutionary tradition of the English Civil War and Commonwealth, as epitomised by the work of the historian Christopher Hill and the tendency of the History from Below movement. What happened at Burford in May 1649 was a crucial victory for the grandees now in control of the state, but it did not kill off the Leveller movement, either in the country at large or in the army. Radical units continued to resist being dispatched to Ireland to suppress the natives in a colonial war reimposing English power, and also maintaining the pressure for the institution of a more democratic dispensation in the country, based on the Leveller petition, manifesto and programme, the agreement of the people. This ultimately resulted in the Oxford garrison mutinying in September 1649 and taking control of the town, issuing demands that the Leveller programme be instituted. Unfortunately, due to a loss of solidarity within the garrison and a lack of outside support, the mutiny was defeated and two of the ringleaders, Private Biggs and Private Piggin, were executed in Gloucester Green, Oxford, on Tuesday, the 18th of September 1649. This represented the final defeat of the Levellers within the army and the end of the possibility of Leveller power transforming the society, and also allowing the grandees to realise their aim of a modified hierarchy under their control. When Gloucester Green was redeveloped in the late 1980s, the local WEA instigated the installation of a plaque in the vicinity of where the executions took place, unveiled by Tony Benn's wife, Caroline. For the last 3 years, Oxford and District Trades Council have held a commemoration on the 18th of September, with singing from the Sea Green Singers, who've sung at Burford for many years, and local radical Labour historian Ciaran Walsh giving the background and trying to resurrect the spirit of the Levellers, who died in Oxford in their last attempt to dislodge tyrannical power.
We fought for a world where people could be free. We fought in the Civil War to end the war. Seek injustice for all, be sure. As the war went on, the rules seemed to change. The general's words were lies. We shall not give up the fight. We shall not give up the fight. One vote apiece our cry. One vote apiece our cry. Together we marched as strong as the sea. Sea green was the colour of our standard. But we don't take part in that Irish struggle. We strode towards Austerity. We stopped for to rest as where we were put out. Took refuge in the church. 3 days was give up the fight. We shall not give up the fight. Then Fairfax shot us dead. He shot 3 Levellers dead. We were known as the Levellers, a name for which we're proud. Our belief that we are all equal. The Levellers we were then, the Levellers we are now. We work for the good of all. We speak against injustice for those who have no voice. For justice will take a stand. We never give up the fight. We shall not give up the fight. The struggle carries on. The Levellers carry on.
A key aspect of the broad appeal and mobilisation the Levellers achieved is the role of women activists in their movement. The women's petitions of the English Revolution, presented to the Rump, to Cromwell and the nominated Parliament between 1649 and 1653, contradict women's theoretical exclusion from politics that was still the norm at that time. Apart from the very few women who could vote as householders in the 17th century, women had virtually no political rights and were legally represented by their husbands, fathers or brothers. Leveller women rejected this view. They stood up as citizens in their own right, attempting to influence national policy through their petitioning, and they were sufficiently organised and persuasive to convince over 10,000 women to sign Britain's first ever all-women petition that was presented to the House of Commons on the 25th of April, 1649. Most notable of the women were Catherine Chidley, Elizabeth Lilburn and Mary Overton. They spoke collectively as a group, and they were the successors of the female demonstrators and petitioners who'd made themselves heard at the very beginning of the Civil War. Like their predecessors, they were aware they were challenging gender norms, confessing it was not their custom to address themselves to this house in the public behalf. Although women petitioners believed they had a fundamental right to petition Parliament, their activism called into question expected gender roles, and they were forced to wrap their demands in apologies for voicing their opinions in public, in order to render their radical stance less outrageous to their audiences. They had to adapt their discourses to the character of their addressees, exclusively men, who were suspicious of women's public speech, extolling conventional feminine virtues such as humility, weakness, subordination in their petitions. But this didn't dilute their key messages. They called for revenge, warning Cromwell that if the policy of the rump did not change, they would all have to pay for it. Nor will we ever rest until we have prevailed, that we, our husbands, children, friends, and servants, may not be liable to be thus abused, violated, and butchered at men's will and pleasure. The women did not only repeat what their husbands said. When the men were silenced or imprisoned, Leveller women were describing themselves as the subscribed representators of the poor, enslaved, oppressed, and distressed men and women in this land. This claim to represent the people undercuts the idea that women themselves could only be represented by male relatives. This is supported by accounts of women mobilising demonstrations and their high level of democratic organisation in getting their petitions signed through wards, parishes, taverns and inns throughout the land. Leveller women's petitions offer an alternative view of a woman's place in the public sphere of publication and debate of the English Revolution. They show that the conflicts and the divisions of that period actually gave women a unique opportunity to assert an otherwise elusive political identity and to exercise their so-called appropriated political freedoms. They also oblige historians to revise the tired idea that the female sex was excluded from politics and was incapable of collective action. Although the political influence of Leveller women petitioners remained constitutionally and historically limited, the very fact that they spoke in their own names as citizens was unheard of and set a precedent for their revolutionary daughters following them. Now, almost 400 years later, in May 2020, many are rightly shocked that Parliament still seeks to transport women back to the protocols of the 17th century. Dawn Butler, first elected as an MP in 2005 and holder of both ministerial and shadow cabinet roles, is the second black woman MP in less than 10 days to be told by a white male Tory to be more like her white male boss. MP and emergency doctor Rosina Aline Khan faced similar arrogance and condescension from Matt Hancock. Their perceived misdemeanour, challenging government policy that puts the interests of the economic power of the few before the health and safety of the many. This applies to a wide range of women in every sphere of life, and the silence from their white male Labour bosses is deafening. At least Leveller women could depend on the support of their male comrades, if not the wider male-dominated establishment. Women's capacity to speak out has always been perceived as somehow threatening, especially in the public sphere. Women learn from experience that every time they express an opinion, they walk a tightrope. They're either considered too mouthy, or they're interrupted and shut down. So I'd like to finish with the inspiring words of encouragement of another outspoken, radical, socialist woman, Laura Pidcock, in 2019. Take your anger, take your pain and your frustration, and take your deep, deep dissatisfaction with this system, and occupy every single space with your politics, without embarrassment, without hesitation, and without fear.
Leveller Women's Petition, 1649. The humble petition of divers well-affected women of the cities of London and Westminster, etc., showeth that, since we are assured of our creation in the image of God, and of an interest in Christ equal unto men, as also of a proportional share in the freedoms of this Commonwealth, we cannot but wonder and grieve that we should appear so despicable in your eyes as to be thought unworthy to petition or represent our grievances to this honourable House. Have we not an equal interest with the men of this nation in those liberties and securities contained in the Petition of Right and the other good laws of the land? Are any of our lives, limbs, liberties, or goods to be taken from us more than from men, except by due process of law and conviction of 12 sworn men of the neighbourhood? And can you imagine us to be so sottish or stupid as not to perceive or not to be sensible when daily those strong defences of our peace and welfare are broken down and trod underfoot by force and arbitrary power? Would you have us keep at home in our houses when men of such faithfulness and integrity as the 4 prisoners, our friends, in the Tower, are fetched out of their beds and forced from their houses by soldiers, to the affrighting and undoing of themselves, their wives, children and families? Are not our husbands, ourselves, our children and families, by the same rule as liable to the like unjust cruelties as they? Doth not the Petition of Right declare that no person ought to be judged by law martial, except in time of war? And we Christians, and shall we sit still and keep at home while such men as have borne continual testimony against the injustice of all times and unrighteousness of men be picked out and delivered up to the slaughter? No, let it be accounted folly, presumption, or whatsoever in us, we will never forsake them, nor ever cease to importune you for justice, that we, our husbands, children, friends, and servants, may not be liable to be thus abused, violated, and butchered at men's wills and pleasures. But if nothing will satisfy you but the blood of those just men, those constant, undaunted assertors of the people's freedoms, will satisfy your thirst, drink also and be glutted with our blood, and let us all fall together. Take the blood of one more and take all. Slay one, slay all.
I would like to entitle this short piece that I've been asked to do to commemorate Levellers' Day as a broadside in broad strokes. Just as obviously at the moment Boris Johnson has been trying to channel the spirit of Winston Churchill and this persona being constructed around him, and we're all in it together in the Blitz spirit. I'd perhaps like to channel the spirit of Thomas Rainsborough, the leader of the Levellers in the army, admiral of the fleet, and head of the artillery in the new model army, of course, who said the poorest he in England has a right to live as much as the greatest he. Indeed, the poorest he or she in England has a right to a voice as much as the greatest he or she in England. But what do we see in our media? The construction of a narrative based on lies, silencing the voices of those who've laid down their lives to save others, betrayed by a gang of obnoxious cavaliers. I'll try to sing a sea green song for our time in the name of Thomas Rainsborough and the other Levellers, the Levellers who were shot in Burford in May 1649, and those who were shot in Oxford in September 1649, who conceived that a better world was possible. And this, they understood then, in the middle of the 17th century. Thomas Hobbes laid it out in his book, Leviathan, that our societies are not laid down by God, but are creations of our own actions and can be broken. Our state can be broken and remade in the interests of the many instead of the tyrannical, lying few. And this led to great upheaval. The level of movement in a broad sense emerged in an era of massive social turmoil, dislocation. All forms of authority were being challenged and overthrown. Social relationships were being transformed with the emergence of new classes. Mass dispossession, colonial expansion and competition had become entrenched, meaning the beginnings of genocide for indigenous people, and the institution of modern slavery and the racism that came in its train. 30 Years' War raged across Europe, the feudal system breaking down, and all the iniquity of the emergence of the modern world system, emerging on the backs of poor people, who served as the base for the emergence of the level of movement, with the addition of radical Puritan religion, emphasizing an egalitarian, non-hierarchical organization. The ideological control system was well and truly under threat and breaking down. And it's in this context that the leveller movement arose, viewed in a broad sense as a mass movement encompassing the Leveller Party, the diggers, the ranters. It represents the passage from the medieval revolt or rebellion to the modern popular revolution, organized on a mass base, aimed not just to challenge authority, but to replace it. Trotsky and Hannah Arendt defined revolution as that social phenomenon that manifests when the poor, oppressed, excluded, exploited, and silenced, in short, the common people, burst onto the stage of history to change politics and society irreversibly. And that's what we need now. We see that reality, ordinary reality, is contrived and it can break down, and that the people who are really important in running the society can be shown in public to be ordinary people, ordinary working people, not money men who fall away, but they must regain control and they must betray those people who have kept society running. Just as the grandees, cavaliers, obnoxious cavaliers, betrayed the people during the 1640s and viewed the people as expendable, just as the people of Ireland were expendable, just as the people of Africa were expendable, just as the people of the Americas were expendable. Well, our own population is expendable to these obnoxious cavaliers. The Levellers represented, in this sense, the first modern political party, mass social movement, from constitutional reformism of Lilburne and the others, to the direct action communism of Winstanley, and to the antinomian anarchism of Ebenezer Copp. And this led, after a long struggle, to the development of a public commons, the NHS, the welfare state, paid for by workers' struggle, blood, sweat, and tears. And it's been betrayed and sold off. These heroes who have kept our society running, later sold to Serco, Google, Tier and Pal technology, all our information sold by these obnoxious cavaliers. And Johnson has the temerity to use levelling language, this liar and charlatan. Well, this is my message for Johnson. Some real levelling language from the olden days. Though you can little Endure the word levelling, and as could the late slain or dead Charles, your forerunner, who is gone before you, and I'd lief hear the devil named as here of the levellers, men levellers and women levellers, witches, who are indeed but shadows of most terrible, yet great and glorious things to come. For this honour, nobility, gentility, propriety, superfluity, etc., hath without contradiction been the father of hellish, horrid pride, arrogance, haughtiness, loftiness, murder, malice, and all manner of wickedness and impiety. Yea, the cause of all blood that ever hath been shed, from the blood of the righteous Abel to the blood of the last levellers that were shot to death at Burford. And now as I live, saith the Lord, I am come to make inquisition for blood, for murder and pride, etc. I see the root of it all. The axe is laid to the root of the tree by the eternal self. My God, myself, the Lord, I will hew it down, and as I live, I will plague your honour, pomp, greatness, superfluity, and confound it into parity, equality, community, that the neck of horrid pride, murder, malice, and tyranny, etc., may be chopped off at one blow, and myself, the eternal God, who am universal love and equality, may fill the earth with universal love, universal peace, perfect freedom and equality, which never can by human sword or strength be accomplished. A levelling message for you, Johnson, on your crew of Cavaliers.
I'm sorry that Burford won't be held this year in that beautiful churchyard in that lovely town, but coronavirus obviously means that it cannot take place as a physical event this year. But I think we can still reflect and learn on the lessons of the Levellers. They're people that stood up for a republic, a genuine republic, accompanied by equality, fair share of land, and respect for all of the people in the country. That was the fundamental debate they had with Cromwell and those that had attempted to seize the English Revolution in order to continue the old order, landowners, peasantry, and poverty. They were opposed to Cromwell's plans in Ireland, and they paid the ultimate price and were executed in the churchyard at Burford. I think we should remember them as part of that great radical tradition that runs all the way through English rural and later urban history in this country. But the lessons of then have to be learnt today also. Coronavirus obviously affects the whole world. It is a virus that grew very quickly somewhere and has spread very rapidly around the world. It's exposed the inequality on our planet of the poorest people in the poorest societies with no access to healthcare at all, desperate people in refugee camps with no access to any kind of medical support to deal with this terrible crisis. It's also exposed inequality in the United States, the lack of access to healthcare for so many people, and a wholly disproportionate death rate amongst the poorest black people in New York, Chicago, and other places. And it's exposed the inequality of our society. Those people that are living in overcrowded houses, being told to stay home, understandably, but the frustration and the stress for them is huge. The growing number of people accessing food banks in order to survive. The growing number of people with mental health and stress problems. And hopefully we're going to come out of coronavirus crisis, but let's learn the lessons from it. Learn the lessons that we rely on cleaners, we rely on nurses, we rely on doctors, we rely on people that Home Secretary disgracefully has described as unskilled in the past. And let's not go into a process of austerity and cuts to local authority and health spending. Let's go into a process of investment for our future in a fairer and more equal society. That's what the Levellers sought to do. That's what we try to do. And that is what our Labour movement, nationally and internationally, is all about. Next year, I hope we can have Levellers Day at Burford. I will look forward to it and I'll be absolutely delighted to be there. My solidarity to everyone that's put so much effort over many years in organising Levellers Day in Burford. Thank you.
In 1649, the St. George's Hill, a ragged band they called the Diggers came to show the people's will. They defied the landlords, they defied the laws. They were the dispossessed, reclaiming what was theirs. The sin of property we do disdain. No one has any right to buy and sell the earth for private gain. By theft and murder they took the land. Now everywhere the walls spring up at their command. We come in peace, they said, to dig and sow. We come to work the land in common, and to make the wasteland grow. This earth divided we will make whole, so it can be a common treasury for all. They make the laws to chain us well. The clergy dazzle us with heaven, or they damn us into hell. We will not worship the God they serve, a life of greed that feeds the rich while people starve. We work, we eat together, we need no sword. We will not bow to the masters, pay no rent to the lords. We are free men, though we are poor. You diggers all stand up for glory, stand up now. We come in peace, they said, to dig and sow. We come to work the land in common, and to make the wastelands grow. This earth divided we will make whole, so it can be a common treasury for all. From the men of property the orders came. They sent the hired men and troopers to wipe out the diggers' claim, tear down their cottages, destroy their corn. They were dispersed, only their vision lingers on. You poor take courage, you rich take care. This earth wasn't made a common treasury for everyone to share. All things in common, all people one. We came in peace, the orders came to cut them down. We come in peace, they said, to dig and sow. We come to work the land in common, and to make the wastelands grow. This earth divided we will make whole, so it can be a common treasury for all. This earth divided we will make whole, so it can be a common treasury for all.